The bell at Vail International was designed to sound neutral, sterile, efficient, and emotionless. They said it kept the students focused. I always thought it sounded like a sigh trapped inside metal. When it rang, a ripple went through the room. Notebooks snapped shut, chairs scraped the floor. 20 pairs of eyes looked up at me, waiting for the dismissal that usually came right after the chime. But I lifted my hand. 2 more minutes, I said softly. I want you to do something different before you leave. Some smiled. Others groaned quietly, the polite rebellion of the privileged. I turned to the board and drew a small square with chalk. Just a white outline, an empty frame on a green sea. Describe how this empty space makes you feel, I told them. You don't need to explain why. Feelings are allowed without reasons. There was a moment of confusion, then silence. The kind of silence that breathes. I watched them bend over their papers, their faces softening as pens began to move. One boy scribbled quickly, impatient to finish. Another stared at the square as if it were a mirror he wasn't ready to face. And at the back, Aisha, the quiet one, whose eyes always carried oceans, wrote with her pencil so lightly I could barely see the marks. When the bell rang again, I walked over to her desk. Her page was almost blank, except for a single line. It feels like my mother waiting at the airport. I don't know if she's coming, but I keep saving a seat. My throat tightened. I smiled and touched her shoulder. That's beautiful, I whispered. This was why I taught. Why I stayed in a system that didn't believe in softness. Because there were still children who did. I was erasing the board when the air in the doorway changed. It's strange how presence can alter oxygen. Adrian Vail was standing there. Tall, immaculate, precise, like he'd been carved from a decision. No assistant, no entourage. He didn't need one. The corridor itself seemed to bend around him. Ms. Duarte, he said, voice smooth as polished stone. Mr. Vail, I replied, turning the eraser in my hand like a shield I didn't know how to use. His eyes moved to the square still faintly visible on the board. Where in the curriculum is that? Page 176, I said. Then, because I never learned how to lie politely, I added, between the lines. His expression didn't change, but something sharp flickered in his gaze. Curiosity, irritation, maybe both. Our parents pay for results, not experiments. Experiments gave them medicine, I said softly. And stories that still matter. Breathing doesn't win scholarships, he replied. Standards do. They're children, I said, meeting his eyes. They'll need both. He looked at me for a long moment, long enough to make me wonder what he saw. Headmistress Mendez wants to see you after last period. Of course, I said. He left without another word, and the room seemed colder after he did. When I turned back, the empty square on the board looked lonelier than before. I erased it last. Maya slipped into the room just as I was gathering my papers. She always moved like she was sneaking up on fate, quick, curious, never quiet enough. He came in here, didn't he? She said, leaning against the doorframe, goggles perched in her hair. Adrian Vail himself. Yes. He asked where I put feelings in the curriculum. And you said something poetic that's going to get you fired, didn't you? I smiled. Maybe. Maya sighed dramatically. Lena, you need to stop poking the bear. The board's obsessed with numbers right now. College placements, donor satisfaction, the whole spreadsheet circus. I'm careful, I said. I just refuse to turn stories into formulas. Literature is supposed to breathe. This city eats idealists for breakfast, she muttered. Then we'll make lunch, I said. We both laughed, but it didn't quite reach my chest. That night, when I went home, I still had chalk dust on my fingers. Proof, I guess, that I had tried to draw something that mattered. Headmistress Mendez's office overlooked the Tagus River. Wide, silver, and too calm for the kind of day I was about to have. I always looked at it when I needed to breathe. Elena, Sophia began. She only called me by my first name when trouble came with a polite face. We've received several parent emails this week. 3 praising your warmth. 7 questioning your methods. Because I let a grieving student turn in a poem instead of an essay? I asked. Or because I made the class read aloud to each other? she sighed. Because you let them talk about their feelings. They have them anyway, I said quietly. I just refuse to teach them to hide them. Before she could respond, the door opened. No knock, of course. Adrian Vale walked in like the word authority had grown legs. Behind him was Victor, his assistant, his shadow, the man who always looked like he was checking boxes no one else could see. Headmistress, Adrian said. Ms. Duarte. Mr. Vale. I stood, not for him, but for the principle of civility. He didn't sit. He didn't have to. We're discussing alignment, Sophia said gently. Alignment, Adrian repeated, with the standards that protect our reputation. Ms. Duarte, your results are acceptable. Your methods are not. I teach literature, I said. Predictability isn't part of the job. In this school it is, he replied. His voice didn't rise, but the air around it did. Parents pay for excellence, not experiments. Excellence and empathy aren't enemies, I said, meeting his gaze. Victor placed a tablet on the desk. Graphs, metrics, surveys? Parent satisfaction has dropped 3 points in your classes, he said. Some families are worried that Vale is becoming soft. I'm not a concierge, I said before I could stop myself. You're an employee, Adrian countered smoothly. And this is a business as much as a school. I'm a teacher, I said. The day I stop being one, I'll leave before you ask me to. Silence followed, sharp and still. I could hear the soft hum of the river outside, calm where I wasn't. Adrian finally spoke. You have 1 week to adjust. No deviations, no personal projects, no abstract exercises. He glanced at the board behind me like he could still see the square there. No empty boxes pretending to be lessons. The way he said it, almost mocking, but not cruel, hit me harder than I expected. He'd noticed. He'd been watching. I looked at him, at the perfect suit, the perfect voice, the man who ran a school like it was a kingdom. I can't promise that, I said quietly. Elena, Sophia began. I can't, I repeated. What I can promise is that every student who leaves my classroom knows how to read a heart without dissecting it. Adrian's eyes darkened. Then this is your last week at Vale. The words landed like a verdict. But instead of breaking, something inside me straightened. I nodded. Understood. He turned away as if he'd already moved on. I didn't. I stayed 1 second longer, just long enough to memorize the faint shimmer of the river through the window, the only honest thing in the room. When I left, Sophia touched my hand, silent apology in her eyes. Adrian didn't look back. And still, I knew he heard my footsteps, because he flinched almost imperceptibly when I stopped at the door and said, I hope you learn what a school really is, before it's too late. Rumors travel faster than truth, especially in expensive buildings. By lunchtime, everyone already knew. Students whispered near lockers. Teachers avoided my eyes. Maya found me sitting alone in the courtyard, watching the sun stain the stone floor gold. You're trending, she said, sitting beside me. The unofficial story is that you committed an act of emotional terrorism. I laughed, though it hurt. Sounds about right, she nudged me. You okay? I thought about Aisha's note, about Adrian's eyes when I told him I wouldn't comply. Not really, I said. But I will be. Classes went on. I taught as if nothing had changed. The kids sensed it anyway. The tension, the unspoken goodbye threading through every lesson. That afternoon, I asked them to write about Mercy. Find one line, I said. That feels like a door. Walk through it, they wrote quietly, pens whispering like rain. I walked among their desks, trying to memorize the rhythm of it. The smell of paper, the dust of chalk, the hum of hope. When the bell rang, Aisha stayed behind. Miss, she said, her small hands trembling around her notebook. Is it true? It's true, I said gently. I'll be leaving after this week. Her eyes filled. Because of me? Because I wrote that line? No, sweetheart. I knelt beside her desk. Because I believe kindness belongs in classrooms, and not everyone agrees. But I don't regret a single word we shared here. She pressed the paper with the empty square into my hand again, So you don't forget, I smiled. I won't. When she left, I stood there alone, the page warm in my hand. Maya appeared a few minutes later, leaning against the doorway. I told some parents you're starting your own workshops. They're in, I blinked. Maya, what? I don't even have a plan, she grinned. You have passion. That's better. You'll teach your way and they'll pay you to do it. Underground kindness. It's the new luxury. You're ridiculous. I'm right, she said. Her grin softened. And I'm proud of you. Even if you're terrified. I am, I admitted. But maybe that's how change starts. We were walking toward the exit when the energy in the building shifted. The kind of hush that only happens when power enters the room. Adrian Vale was in the lobby, and beside him stood a man I'd only seen on posters. Luca Vale, the pianist brother. He looked nothing like Adrian. Softer eyes, a kind of quiet that filled spaces instead of commanding them. When his gaze found me, he smiled like he'd been expecting me. Is that the teacher you fired? He asked Adrian, not lowering his voice. This isn't the time, Adrian said, jaw tight. Luca ignored him and turned to me. You're the one who drew the square. I am, I said cautiously. He tilted his head. It's a good lesson. Silence teaches things words can't. I smiled despite myself. I thought so too. If my brother had any sense, he'd ask you to run this place, Luca said lightly. Adrian's eyes cut toward him, then toward me, dark, unreadable. Luca, Maya tugged at my sleeve. We should go, she whispered. Ms. Duarte, Adrian said. Not a command, almost a plea he didn't understand. Mr. Vale, I answered, and walked past him. Outside, Lisbon's air was cool and full of salt. The city glowed under the evening sun, and for the first time in weeks I felt free. Scared, but free. The next morning, my name was a currency everyone spent differently. Some teachers spoke it with pity, others with relief, like a cautionary tale that let them keep their own jobs a little longer. The students whispered, their voices flickering down the hallways like candlelight. At Vale International, unprofessional was the word they used when someone remembered to care too much. Still, I taught. Because that's what teachers do. We show up even when we're bleeding inside. My classroom smelled like old books and defiance. The sunlight slid across the desks like a secret. I began the lesson as if the world hadn't changed. Today, I told them, we're reading about mercy. A hand rose. Miss, what if the world doesn't have any? Then we build it, I said. They wrote for an hour, their pens whispering like wind in the grass. I collected their papers and felt my throat tighten. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was knowing I wouldn't see who they'd become. Somewhere above me, I imagined Adrian Vale behind his glass walls, ruling over his empire of scores and numbers. He probably thought firing me was the end of a small inconvenience. He didn't know that kindness leaves ghosts, gentle ones that linger. When lunch came, I sat alone under a tree in the courtyard, my sandwich untouched. The city hummed beyond the iron gates, car horns, laughter, church bells. Lisbon never stopped singing, even when hearts broke quietly inside it. I thought about the life waiting for me outside Vale. A smaller apartment, uncertain bills, fewer certainties. But also mornings without fear, and classrooms built on choice instead of permission. Maya found me there, balancing 2 coffees and a stormy expression. You know what's funny? She said, sitting beside me. The parents are arguing online. Half of them think you're a visionary, the other half think you're a revolutionary. Either way, you're famous. Wonderful, I said. Maybe I'll start signing chalkboards. You joke, she said, nudging my shoulder. But people are already asking about your workshops. You might actually have to do this. I looked at her. Really looked. Her eyes fierce. Her loyalty louder than words. You believe I can? Of course I do, she said. Someone has to teach them that tenderness isn't a weakness. I smiled, but my chest ached. Because tenderness was exactly what had cost me everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the narrow streets of Alfama, the city glittering below, every cobblestone remembering footsteps. Lisbon at night is a confession. Soft light, slow air, the smell of the river and wine. I stood on a bridge, looking at my reflection trembling in the water. Was I brave or just stubborn? I didn't know anymore, but I knew this. I couldn't go back to teaching with a silenced heart. Above me, a light turned on in a penthouse across the river. I didn't know it then, but Adrian Vale was awake too. He'd received an email from a donor that evening, one line that unsettled him. My son says he finally feels safe in Ms. Duarte's class. Please reconsider. He had stared at the message for a long time, the words pressing against his certainty like rain against glass. He'd closed the email, poured himself a drink, and told himself the decision was final. But something inside him, something he thought he'd buried long ago, whispered that he was wrong. And maybe, just maybe, he listened. My final day at Vale arrived dressed like any other. Morning sun, crisp uniforms, perfect order. The school hummed with its usual precision, the rhythm of a machine built on expectations. Parents arrived early that afternoon. Some hugged me with tears, others with polite distance. One offered me an envelope. "A little help until you find your next position," she said. I shook my head gently. "I can't take that." "You deserve support," she insisted. "I deserve to keep my principles," I said softly. And she understood, the way women often do, wordlessly. When the crowd thinned, I stood at the gates, holding Aisha's folded paper in my palm. It had been through my hands so many times the creases were almost soft. An empty square, a space to feel. That was all I'd wanted to give them. "Ms. Duarte," I turned. It wasn't Adrian this time. It was Luca Vale, his younger brother, the pianist. He carried a black case and an easy warmth that didn't belong to this school. "I didn't want to interrupt earlier," he said, "but I wanted to invite you to something. I'm rehearsing tonight at the old theater on Rua do Alecrim. Come." "I shouldn't," I said automatically. "You should," he said, his tone soft but sure. "When the world tells you you're wrong for being gentle, you need to sit in a room where gentleness roars." His words caught me off guard. Music spoken as truth. I hesitated. "Maybe," he smiled. "Bring your friend, the one with the wild hair and the goggles. Maya," I said, laughing. "She'll love you just for remembering that." "I remember what people use to protect themselves," he said, then nodded and walked away, the setting sun gilding his silhouette. I watched him go, not knowing that the invitation would change more than my evening. That night, the old theater was half-lit and full of ghosts. The seats smelled of dust and velvet, the air heavy with old applause. Maya sat beside me, whispering that she hadn't been to anything this elegant since her cousin's wedding. Then Luca began to play. The first notes were fragile, uncertain, like someone whispering an apology to the dark. Then they grew deep and full, a wave that swallowed silence. I closed my eyes. The music felt like forgiveness, like the sound of someone choosing hope again. I thought about my students, about Aisha's empty square, about the look in Adrian's eyes when I told him I couldn't obey. For the first time since that meeting, I didn't feel broken. I felt human. After the final note, the theater held its breath. Then Luca looked up, straight at me. "You teach the way I play," he said softly. "And you play the way I wish the world listened," I replied. He smiled. "My brother used to understand that." "Used to?" "He's forgotten how to feel things that don't make money," Luca said gently. "But maybe he'll remember. People like you remind others what they've lost." I wanted to say something, but words seemed too small. When I returned home that night, I stood on my tiny balcony overlooking the city lights. The river shimmered below, patient and endless. I unfolded Aisha's paper again, placed it on my desk, and beneath the empty square I wrote, "Empty spaces are where the heart learns how to echo." I sat there, reading it until my eyes blurred. Across the river, in a room high above the city, Adrian Vale couldn't sleep either. He'd spent the entire day pretending to feel victorious, but all he felt was an ache, the kind that starts in the chest and spreads like doubt. Victor had left. The office was silent, and the skyline glittered like a question he couldn't answer. He poured another drink and thought of the chalk square on the board, of the woman who'd looked him in the eye and said, I hope you learn what a school really is. He had built an empire on discipline, logic, and profit. But that sentence, her sentence, was a crack in the foundation. And cracks, he knew, never stay small. He closed his eyes and saw her again. The warmth in her voice, the courage she wore like perfume, the stubborn kindness he couldn't quantify. He told himself it was irritation. It wasn't. And as the city of Lisbon slept between us, I think both of us knew, without saying a word, that something had already begun to change. Freedom didn't arrive with trumpets. It arrived quietly, in the sound of my alarm not ringing at 6, in the absence of a uniform hallway smell, in the way my morning coffee finally had time to cool before I drank it. For the first time in years, I woke without a bell deciding when to speak. The air in my apartment felt lighter, like the walls were finally breathing with me. But emptiness, I learned, also echoes. I spent the first week after Vale in a blur of lists. Rent due, mother's medication, job postings that all required me to be less than I was. Each day I crossed off everything except find meaning. That one stayed. Maya wouldn't let me disappear. She showed up every morning with her hair a new kind of chaos and coffee strong enough to make confessions. "You're not going to mope yourself into unemployment," she said one morning. "You're too loud for despair." "I'm not loud," I said. "You teach like a hurricane and love like an author." "Trust me, you're loud." She was right, though I didn't admit it. There was a noise inside me that silence couldn't contain. Part longing, part grief, part unfinished sentence. The small workshops she'd promised on my behalf began as a joke and became real overnight. A parent texted, another called, and by Friday I had 12 students and a borrowed room in a bookstore near Barro Alto. The first day, I stood in front of them. No chalkboard, no rules, just a semicircle of young faces and the faint smell of paper and ink. "Here," I said, "we learn how to feel before we learn how to write." It wasn't Vale, but it was mine. And yet, every evening when I walked home, I'd pass by the school gates. The windows glowed gold in the sunset. Inside, another teacher probably stood in my place, following the approved syllabus, handing out grades that weighed heavier than joy. I told myself I was free, but part of me still pressed a palm against that invisible glass, the side that had been told not to care too much. I thought I'd left Adrian Vale behind. I was wrong, because freedom doesn't silence ghosts. It teaches you how to live with them. Luca called 2 weeks later. "I'm playing again on Saturday," he said. "Would you come?" I hesitated. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" My brother doesn't own sound," he interrupted gently. "Besides, he won't be there. He's allergic to anything that isn't profit." I laughed, which felt like remembering sunlight. "Then I'll come." The rehearsal was smaller this time, but warmer. The theater smelled of coffee and dust and promise. Maya came, of course. She insisted on bringing flowers. Because musicians deserve chaos, too. When Luca played, something shifted in me. His hands moved like forgiveness, effortless, certain. Afterwards, we talked in the dim light backstage. "You look lighter," he said. "Still sad, but lighter." "Is that your diagnosis as a pianist?" "As a human," he said. "The world tried to break your rhythm. You're finding a new one." We sat on the edge of the stage, the city humming beyond the open doors. He told me stories about Berlin, about losing himself in music until he forgot the language he was born in. I told him about Aisha, about the square, about the cost of teaching kindness in a place that feared it. "Adrian read about you, you know," he said suddenly. I turned, startled. "What?" There was an article online. Some parent wrote a piece about the teacher who taught empathy. It's been shared everywhere. He pretends not to care, but I saw his phone. He read it twice. The thought pierced through me like unexpected rain. It doesn't matter. Maybe not. But it shook him. And trust me, shaking Adrian is like making a statue blink. That night, when I came home, I found an envelope under my door. No name, just my address written in handwriting that could only belong to someone who never wastes movement. Inside was a check. And a note, for your workshops. Consider it a donation, not a debt. AVI sat there for a long time. the paper trembling between my fingers. I should have torn it in half. Instead, I folded it and placed it in the drawer beside Aisha's note. 2 ghosts side by side, one made of innocence, one of guilt. Maya called 5 minutes later, as if she could feel the air change. "Tell me you're not thinking about him," she said. "I'm not," I lied. "Elena," I sighed. "It was a donation for the kids. From the man who fired you for caring about kids." "I know." She paused. "Do you want me to burn it?" I laughed. "No, I'll keep it. As evidence of what? That even stone hearts sometimes crack." I hung up, turned off the lights, and lay awake, staring at the ceiling until dawn. I didn't spend the check, but I couldn't throw it away either. A month passed. My classes grew. Word spread faster than I expected. Parents came to listen at the back. Some even took notes. We didn't just talk about literature. We talked about being human. One afternoon, while I was explaining metaphor to a group of teenagers, the bookstore owner, Joanna, poked her head in. "There's someone asking for you." I wiped chalk dust from my hands. I still used chalk, even in a bookstore, and stepped outside. He was there, Adrian Vale. Not in his suit of armor this time, but in a navy sweater and silence. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The street behind him blurred. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. "Mr. Vale," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Elena," he said, as if my name were an old memory rediscovered. "I didn't mean to interrupt your class. You're standing in a bookstore. You can't interrupt here. Only listen." A faint smile touched his lips, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes but still tries. "Then I'll listen." He stepped closer, careful, almost reverent. "I wanted to see what you built." "It's small," I said. "But it's mine." "It's alive," he said. "Vale isn't." That startled me. "What do you mean?" He looked away for a second, his jaw tightening. "Enrollment dropped after you left. Some parents withdrew their children. They said the school felt colder." "Maybe it always was," I said. "Maybe I didn't notice until it was too late." There it was. The admission I never thought I'd hear. It didn't sound like victory. It sounded like sorrow. "I read that article," he continued. "I didn't like how much truth it had." "You didn't come here for literature, Adrian." "No," he said. I came to apologize. My heart stuttered. Words don't usually make me weak, but that one did. He exhaled. "I was wrong. About the way I ran the school. About what I thought mattered. You were right. They need warmth as much as structure." "You fired me for saying that," I said softly. "I know." "And now you regret it?" "I don't regret the decision I made," he said, voice low. "I regret the reasons I made it." There was something raw in his honesty, something stripped of his usual armor. For a second, I saw not the headmaster, not the businessman, but the man who'd once believed in something before the world taught him to count it. "You can't fix this," I said gently. "I'm not trying to fix it." His gaze held mine. "I'm trying to understand it." The silence between us felt like the pause between heartbeats. Then Joanna called from inside. "Elena, your students are waiting." I nodded, grateful for the interruption. "I have to go." He stepped back. "Of course." As I turned away, he said my name again, soft and certain. "Elena." I looked back. "I still think about that square on the board," he said. "The one without words." I wanted to answer, but my throat betrayed me. So I just smiled. The kind of smile that hides more than it shows, and went back inside. The next time I looked out the window, he was gone. But the air still carried his presence, faint and electric, like the echo of a chord that hadn't finished resolving. Freedom changes shape when someone you tried to forget speaks your name without raising his voice. After Adrian came to the bookstore, the city looked the same. Trams rattling down the hills, laundry strung like flags over alleyways, the river laying its silver shoulder against the stone. But something in me refused to settle. I kept telling myself that his apology didn't matter, that a late realization is just a bruise pressed gently, not a cure. And yet, When night slid into my little apartment, and the lights of the bridge blinked like careful eyes, I'd catch myself replaying his expression. Not triumphant. Not even defensive. Just bare. I work better with things I can hold. So I held paper. I built extra lessons for my workshops, a module about writing a scene inside silence, an exercise where you describe a person only through what they refuse to say. The teenagers loved it. They recognized themselves in the unsent texts and swallowed words. Write the pause, I told them. Then tell me what you wish you'd said. They wrote like swimmers discovering air. After class, when the bookstore returned to its natural hush and the owners began counting the day's receipts, I took my notebook to the back staircase that smells like binding glue and rain, and I wrote to the one person I had no intention of sending a letter to. Dear man who changed his mind too late, I don't want your regret. I don't want your money. I want you to remember that a school is a chorus and you turned it into a metronome. Do you know what rhythm sounds like without breath? It sounds like fear wearing a perfect tie. Maya says letters that stay in drawers still travel. I slid the page beside the check he'd sent and closed the wood as if I could lock time. Luca came by with the kind of smile that belongs in rooms before performances. He leaned against the philosophy shelf and exhaled a melody that wasn't on any staff. You look like someone who finished crying and forgot to wash her face, he said. I haven't cried. I lied. He glanced at my notebook. No, your eyes are red with poetry. We walked to the cafe on the corner where the owner serves espresso like a ceremony. I told him about the apology and he listened, chin on hand, quiet in the way musicians can be. One silence for the room, another for the person you're with. He's trying, Luca said finally. He's been visiting classes at Vail. He sits at the back and takes notes like a student who cares more about the lesson than the grade. That's new? It used to be numbers first, always. Now he asks teachers what the children laughed at this week. Something in me tensed and softened at once. You're trying to make me forgive him. I'm trying to make you believe you didn't throw your heart against a wall for nothing. He hesitated. And I'm trying to make my brother remember he was human before he was efficient. That night, the city broke open with rain. Lisbon in a storm smells like stone remembering the sea. I dragged my plants away from the balcony edge and stood barefoot on the tiles watching water smear the lights into soft confession. Thunder made the windows hum. I pressed my palm to the glass and thought of the square I'd drawn on the board the day everything tilted. A frame around absence, a small invitation to let feelings speak. What would I write in that square now? It feels like standing in a doorway with a suitcase and a spine. The next morning I woke to a bouquet at my door. White lilies with green throats. The exact kind my mother calls prayers you can touch. No card. The paper crinkled like a secret. I didn't have to guess. I set the lilies in a jar and told them, "You're not an apology. You're evidence." The apartment filled with a clean sweetness that reminded me of hospital corridors and wedding aisles, of beginnings and endings dancing too close. I visited my mother after lunch. She was sharper that day, eyes bright with mischief. "You look like the kind of woman who is about to do something foolish," she said, adjusting her cardigan like a queen accepting weather. "I'm going to teach a room full of adults how to sit with feelings," I said. "That's not foolish." She searched my face with the same gaze that used to find me in school assemblies. "But you will do something foolish soon. Your mouth knows it. It's trying not to smile." I kissed her forehead and blamed the lilies. The bookstore grew into a small, stubborn constellation. Parents began to bring siblings. Siblings brought grandparents. Teenagers brought poems folded like maps. I made tea in mismatched cups and told them that a classroom can be anywhere two people agree to listen. Some evenings I gave them homework. Find a doorway that scares you and stand in it for 10 breaths. Report back with adjectives. They did. They wrote words like salt bright and near ache and almost home. I pretended not to be proud and failed. 3 days before the conference where I'd been asked to speak, a rain-smeared cab stopped outside the bookstore, and a man in a navy coat waited under his umbrella without impatience. He didn't come in. He watched through the window as I laughed at something a boy said, as I pointed to the sentence that mattered, as I closed my eyes to hear a line better. When I finally looked up, the cab was gone. On the doormat, the lilies were fresher, with a single white card tucked under the string. Consider this a promise to keep listening. AVI didn't cry. I cleaned the chalk from my hands, touched the card to my lips for a breath I lied about later, and placed it deep inside the drawer, where ghosts make a home of ink. The auditorium was smaller than Vale's theater, but braver. University chairs squeaked, lights hummed, and a girl in the front row clutched a notebook like a shield. When they introduced me, Elena Duarte, educator and workshop founder, I remembered being a child in a kitchen with tiles that never warmed, reading to my mother while water boiled, words as shelter. I told the room that children are not glass to be displayed. They are gardens to be tended, and you cannot harvest kindness with a ruler. I told them rigor is not cruelty, and that tenderness is a form of precision. I told them about the square with no words. When I finished, the silence didn't feel like judgment. It felt like a deep breath. Applause rose the way rain begins, gathering itself until it became weather. Hands shook mine. Questions braided themselves around praise. Someone cried into my shoulder and apologized for crying, and I apologized for apologizing, and we laughed. It was messy and human and perfect. I saw him only when the room thinned. He stood in the back where the light isn't sure what to do with faces, hands clasped, eyes steady. Adrian without the building that obeys him. I don't know why I expected the suit like a shell. The dark coat made him look younger and somehow truer. He waited while the crowd consumed my attention and then waited longer, as if patience could pay back a debt. "Ms. Duarte," he said when we were alone among rows of empty chairs. The old wood held the day's heat. The stage smelled faintly of dust and ambition. "Adrian," I answered, because names become first names when history makes formalities ridiculous. "You spoke beautifully. Thank you." "You were right," he said, voice low enough that the lights didn't hear. "About everything. Too late," I said, and the words sat between us like a cup neither of us could lift. He nodded, and for a moment I saw the boy he must have been, the one who wanted gold stars because no one taught him how to keep the ones on the sky. "I'm not asking you to come back," he said. "I don't deserve that answer. I came because I needed to see what integrity looks like when it isn't afraid. Now you've seen it. I saw it the day I fired you," he said, half smiling like a man quoting a line he doesn't deserve. I pretended I didn't. The door creaked and released a slice of evening. I could smell rain waiting. We stood under the old lamps, and I told him that I had built something else, something alive. And he said he knew, and that Vale had learned how to say please in the past month. "It's a start," he said. "They don't tremble when I enter a room anymore. Or perhaps I'm the one who trembles." "You learned how to listen," I said. "That's both the first and the last lesson." He took a breath as if to ask for forgiveness and decided against it. Then carefully, "Will you let me send students to you?" Not as a gesture, as an admission that you do something I cannot. I wanted to be cruel because cruelty is easier to carry than longing. Instead I said, "Send the ones who think they hate books. Send the ones who think they need to earn permission to feel. I will." We walked out together into a street rinsed clean by a shy rain. Lisbon smelled like citrus peels and wet stone. Headlights drew silver ribbons on the road. At the corner, the world made a choice for us. A tram clanged, a cyclist swore in Italian, a dog chased a reflection, and he reached to steady me when a puddle tried to swallow my shoe. His hand touched my elbow, too brief to be a claim, too careful to be an accident. And for a breath the whole city narrowed to the part of me that remembered how it felt to be held without permission slips. "Thank you," I said. Unsteady for a reason no curriculum can measure. For what? For not pretending this is easy. It isn't. He looked at the river as if it could translate me. "I brought flowers last week and then I hated myself for bringing anything at all." "You don't owe me your forgiveness." "Good," I said, softer than I meant to. We reached the corner where people say goodbye because moving forward requires separate directions. He hesitated. The lamplight turned his eyes a color I didn't have a name for. "You once told me you hoped I learned what a school is before it was too late," he said. "It may be too late to keep you. It isn't too late to keep the promise. Promises are rooms you have to furnish daily." I nodded because words felt dangerous. He left with the kind of restraint that hurts to watch. I walked along the river, past windows where people were being ordinary on purpose. Dinners, laughter, someone practicing scales. My phone buzzed with a message from Maya. "Well?" And I sent her a voice note that was mostly weather, and then, finally, he listened. Chidiyu replied with 15 exclamation marks and a heart that looked like it had survived a house. Fire. On the way home, I stopped by my mother's. She was awake, with a book in her lap and the kind of smile that grandparents claim is theirs. "You look like someone who put down a sword," she said. "I didn't have one. You had a spine." "We use what we have." She patted the cushion. "Tell me the long version." I gave it to her, all the way from the old auditorium smell to the puddle that thought it was a lake. She listened the way Luca plays, every silence a note. When I was done, she pressed my hand. "There are men who learn too late and keep learning anyway. Your father was one." She looked at me with eyes no doctor could fix. "You don't have to forgive him to believe him." That night, back in my apartment, I found the lilies drooping gracefully, tired of being perfect. I trimmed the stems and changed the water as if tending mercy. On my desk, the square Aisha had given me waited with its patient emptiness. I wrote beneath it, "What remains after the apology is the work. What remains after regret is a room with 2 chairs. Sit. Speak. Listen. Leave when you must." I set down my pen, turned off the lamp, and lay in a darkness that didn't feel like loss. Across the river, a window brightened, then dimmed. Somewhere, a man who once trusted silence more than he trusted people chose to keep listening. I didn't have to see him to know. The river carried the news better than words. Before sleep, I told the night a secret I wasn't ready to write. I was no longer angry. Not healed, healing is an occupation, not an event, but no longer living from the wound. I fell into a dream where the classroom had no walls, and every desk was a doorway, and the bell at the end of the day wasn't an order. It was a blessing. In the morning, the city smelled like bread. I unlocked the bookstore early and chalked a sentence on the little sidewalk board Maya insists we keep. The first tram clanged by, the driver waving at the woman with the messy hair and the stubborn heart. My students would arrive with notebooks and doorways and oversized feelings. I would pour tea. We would practice the simple, radical craft of naming what we carry. As I wrote, I understood the shape of the next chapter, not of the book I was teaching, but of the life that had decided not to wait for permission. The past was a country I could visit without moving in. What remained was mine, the square, the river, the room, the promise. And the knowing, steady as a hand on an elbow in the dark, that sometimes people change too late to keep you, but early enough to become the person you had asked them to be. That's not a happy ending. It's an honest beginning, and it was enough, more than enough, for me to turn the sign on the door to open and mean it. Sometimes I wake before the city does. There's a certain honesty in those hours when even the trams are quiet, when the Tagus is just a sheet of patient silver waiting for the light. I sit by the window with tea, tracing the same thought again and again. That silence is its own kind of correspondence. It's been 3 months since the last letter. I told myself I was relieved, that his absence meant closure, that no news was the cleanest ending. Yet I still find myself checking the post twice a day. I imagine him writing and stopping midway, unsure if he has the right to send anything anymore. Maybe that's what we are now. Sentences left unfinished out of fear of being misunderstood. Maya says I overthink everything. She's right, of course, but she didn't see the way he looked at the children that day in the art room. Not as a principal, not as a man in control, but as someone seeing light for the first time. That kind of change, however small, doesn't leave you easily. The workshops have grown into something that almost resembles a movement. I teach every day in the old cathedral hall. Sunlight filtering through glass, laughter echoing against ancient stone. It's not perfection. It's real, the kind of real I used to crave when I still worked at Vale, when I believed kindness could survive bureaucracy. Sometimes, between sessions, I catch myself thinking about what he's doing. Whether the walls of that school still remember me, whether he still walks the same corridor and pauses by the mural, whether he still says my name when no one's listening, but I don't write. I've learned that not every ache deserves a reply. One night, as I'm closing up, a woman lingers near the door, young, nervous, clutching a notebook to her chest. "Miss Duarte," she says, "I came from Vale. I was one of your students before they—" She doesn't finish. We sit on the steps outside. She tells me she stayed, that the classes have changed, that there's a new kind of air in the hallways. He listens now, she says. It's strange. He even lets us talk about feelings in assemblies. He calls it emotional literacy. The words fall like rain, gentle but relentless. He said you taught him that, she adds. I smile, small and sad. Then I hope he's still learning. When she leaves, I walk home under the yellow lamps of Alfama, and the city hums like it knows something I don't. The next morning, Maya bursts in waving a letter like a flag. You're not going to believe this, she says, out of breath. He's coming here. I freeze halfway through pouring coffee. Who? Adrian Vale, she replies. Apparently there's an education forum next week, hosted right here in Lisbon. Guess who they asked to speak about empathy in learning environments? I set the mug down too hard. Coffee spills like punctuation. Not me. You and him, together. Panel discussion. For a long moment, I just stare at her. My mind paints the scene before I can stop it. The stage lights, the audience, his voice echoing beside mine. I can't, I whisper. Yes, you can, she says. Because avoiding him won't change what he did. And maybe, just maybe, it's time he sees who you became after he broke you. Her words stay with me all week. When the day finally arrives, I dress in a pale blue dress that feels like armor. The event hall buzzes with conversation and the faint metallic scent of microphones. I step on stage second. He's already there, hands clasped, posture immaculate as always. Elena, he says quietly as I pass. His voice catches somewhere between apology and breath. Adrian. The moderator starts with introductions, but my pulse drowns her out. For the next 40 minutes, I listen to him speak about educational reform, emotional growth, and the importance of humility in leadership. Every word feels aimed at me. When it's my turn, I don't look at him. I tell the audience about vulnerability, about how systems teach compliance before compassion. I talk about mistakes, the kind that bruise but also instruct. My hands tremble, but my voice doesn't. When the panel ends, people clap. We shake hands for the cameras, a practiced gesture of civility. His fingers linger just a second too long. Afterward, he finds me backstage. You were brilliant, he says. I wasn't trying to be. That's what brilliance looks like, he murmurs. I fold my arms. What do you want from me, Adrian? He exhales, eyes darting to the floor. Nothing. Maybe forgiveness one day, but not today. There's something in his tone that softens the edges of my anger. I nod once. Then keep doing the work, I say. With or without me. He smiles faintly. With your shadow, at least. That night I can't sleep. The conversation replays in my mind. Not the words, but the pauses between them. It's strange how forgiveness can sound like a door closing softly instead of slamming shut. Days pass. The forum makes headlines, and suddenly people treat me like a symbol. The teacher who taught the headmaster empathy. I hate it. Empathy isn't something you teach once. It's something you practice daily, like breathing. Adrian sends no letters, but he starts leaving traces. A set of donated art supplies delivered anonymously to our studio. A note slipped between sketchbooks that reads, "For the next generation of listeners." He never signs his name, but I know. One evening, while rearranging the shelves, I find an envelope tucked inside a stack of blank canvases. Inside is a photograph, the mural at Vale, my square at its center. Around it, new words: growth, courage, return. On the back, in his handwriting, they asked to repaint the wall. I told them to add to it instead. I sit down on the floor and cry quietly, not because of him, but because of what we built despite him. That night, I walk to the river. The city glows gold and blue, reflections trembling like nerves. I think about distance, how it isn't always measured in meters but in what we choose not to say. If I saw him now, I wouldn't know whether to thank him or to turn away. Both impulses feel like truth. A tram passes, its light briefly illuminating the railing beside me. I trace the cold metal with my fingertips and whisper into the wind. I'm not ready. The wind doesn't answer, but somewhere inside me, a quieter voice does. You will be. The rain returned on a Thursday, the kind that begins politely and then decides to stay for dinner. I was locking up the studio when Hugo, the boy who believes feelings are fish, appeared in the doorway with eyes like storm glass. He was shivering under a too-thin jacket, a backpack sagging from one strap. "Miss Elena," he said, barely audible. Can I just sit here a bit?" I let him in. The studio smelled of wet wool and lemon oil from the tables we'd sanded that morning. I put water to boil and gave him a towel and the softest chair, one of those inherited from an aunt who believed in furniture as company. He watched the kettle like it owed him an answer. When the tea was ready, he wrapped both hands around the mug as if it could teach his bones how to be warm again. "What happened?" I asked. He shrugged, shame and anger battling in that small movement. "Dad says poems make people weak." I said poems make me breathe. He said breathing is a luxury. A tremor flickered across his mouth. I left, I walked. "And then it rained. I'm glad you came here," I told him. "Sometimes walking away is how you carry yourself home." He sat there, drinking slowly, the steam ghosting his lashes. After a while he said, "Could I write something and not have anyone read it?" "Not even you?" "Of course," I said, and slid him a notebook we keep for emergencies of the heart. He wrote for 20 minutes, words digging a little trench between him and the dark. When he finished, he tore the page out and folded it into a boat. "Can I?" "Yes," I said, already reaching for my coat. "Let's give it to the river." We went out together. The city was a watercolor, all edges softened by rain. We walked down to the small fountain in the square, our practice river when the Tagus feels too far. He placed the paper boat on the water. It trembled, steadied, and drifted, collecting lamplight in its crease. "What did you write?" I asked. He watched the boat float toward the drain where small rivers go to sleep. I wrote, "I'm not a problem. I'm a person." The wind tried to steal the sentence. The water carried it anyway. I stood beside him until the boat disappeared. "You're both," I said. "A person with problems. We all are. That's why the poems exist." He nodded, and the nod looked older than his years. When we returned to the studio, I called a taxi and waited with him until it came. He hugged me, a fierce, embarrassed squeeze, and whispered, "Thank you for being a place." After he left, I stayed to mop footprints and measure my breath. That was when the electricity surrendered to the storm. The room sighed into darkness. Outside, the rain threaded the street like silver wires. I went to the window for the comfort of ordinary shapes and froze. A man stood beneath the street lamp, umbrella tilted, coat dark with rain. He wasn't facing me. He was watching the square where the fountain shone like a small heaven. For a second I thought I had conjured him. How many nights had I imagined him here, a silhouette admitting to the weather he was wrong. But then he turned, and the light made his face real. Adrian. I could have pretended not to see him. I could have let the storm take the moment and dissolve it. Instead, I opened the door and stepped into the rain. "You'll catch a cold," I said, because old habits dress themselves in small talk. He closed the umbrella. Of course he did. And the rain found new territory on his shoulders. "I was on my way back from a meeting," he said. "Saw the lights at your studio, then saw them go out. I thought you might need a hand." "I don't," I said, and then contradicted myself by adding, "But the fuse box is older than my patience." He followed me inside. The dark made us both gentler. We found the metal cabinet behind a stack of canvases and stood too close without touching. I held the flashlight. He read the switches like a foreign language he was sure he could learn. When the lights returned with a hum, we both blinked as if we had been underwater. "Thank you," I said. "Any time," he replied, and the word sounded like a promise he had no right to make. He glanced at the towel draped over the chair, the spare mug on the counter. "Someone was here." "Hugo," I said. "A difficult evening." He nodded, the nod of someone who now knows that words like difficult are clocks with many hands. "Do you need anything? Extra supplies? A heater that actually heats?" "I need you to keep doing the work at Vale," I said. "Even when no one writes about it." "I will," he said simply. "I'm better in the shadows than on stages." "You used to be good at stages," I said before I could stop myself. "That was performance," he answered. "This is practice." We fell quiet. He looked around the room like it was a country he hoped would let him visit. The rain softened outside, a tired drum. He picked up a brush from the table and turned it in his fingers. When Luca plays, people say he's generous with silence. I used to think silence was for endings. He set the brush down and looked at me. Now I think it might be a kind of beginning. The problem with sincerity is that it doesn't carry a warning label. It arrives and you either meet it or you run. I did a small and dangerous thing. I didn't run. Can I show you something? I asked. He nodded. I brought out the cardboard box where we keep artifacts that don't fit in lesson plans. A bottle of ocean sand, a broken metronome, a ribbon of stage light from a theater that closed. I lifted the metronome and placed it on the table between us. It belonged to a teacher I had in secondary school, I said. He taught literature like you tune an instrument, steady, precise. When I told him I wanted to teach, he gave me this and said, "Keep time, but don't worship it." I tapped the metal arm and we listened to its patient tick. I think I forgot his second instruction for a while. So did I, Adrian said. I built a school on metronomes and called it Excellence. We watched the pendulum swing. The sound became a third person in the room, a chaperone that allowed us to stand without inventing a future. When the metronome wound down, the silence that replaced it felt like an honest answer to a question neither of us had asked out loud. He was the one to step back. "I should go," he said. "You're exhausted, and your students arrive early." "You're learning to listen," I said. "Only because you refuse to stop speaking," he replied, and somehow that sentence felt more romantic than anything else he could have said. At the door, he hesitated. The hall light made a halo of steam around us. "Elena," he said, and my name in his mouth felt like an instrument finally tuned. "If you ever need anything at all that isn't me, ask." "That's not how it works," I said softly. "I know," he answered. But I needed to try. He left with the umbrella still closed, as if he wanted the rain to have the last word. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood and let my breath catch up. I didn't cry. The feeling was quieter than that, a tide going out to reveal stones I hadn't noticed before. The next morning I arrived early to find a small space heater on the doorstep. Brand new, the instruction manual folded into a paper crane. No note. There didn't need to be. That afternoon, Luca swept in like weather's better twin. He wore a scarf the color of twilight and carried a bag that made the exact sound of sheet music. "I have 15 minutes and a gossip-shaped soul," he announced. Did my brother learn how to be helpful without narrating it? "He fixed my fuse," I said. "Progress," he replied, grinning. "If you ever need him to change a tire, he'll watch a 7-hour tutorial, buy 3 kinds of jacks, and write a policy about tire safety. But he'll do it. He's trying to be a person. It's exhausting to witness." We laughed, and the laughter warmed the corners of the room that the heater hadn't reached yet. Before he left, Luca rested a hand on my shoulder. "I'm not neutral, Elena. I want you to be happy. I also want him to deserve a life that isn't made of punishment." He squeezed once. Luckily, those can be the same wish. That evening, I taught the adults circle about thresholds, the places where you can still go back, but going forward makes a different person of you. We wrote about doors we had stood inside and the weather on both sides. I didn't write about Adrian. I wrote about a girl in a too-bright school who taught a room to hold its breath and discovered that air is stronger than iron. Days stretched, then folded. A new girl joined the Saturday group with a scar across her knuckles in the shape of a question mark. A father wrote me an email that began with suspicion and ended with gratitude. A retiree brought a loaf of bread still warm and said, "I had to feed the room that keeps feeding me." The heater whirred like a faithful pet. In a drawer, the metronome waited for the next lesson about time. On a Sunday when the rain finally rested, I took the long way home along the river. Couples fought softly in doorways. A child raced his own shadow. A violinist played a song that made even the pigeons behave. I stopped at the railing and thought about the art room at Vale, about Hugo's paper boat, about the man who had learned to close his umbrella. The city held all of it without choosing sides. I tried to learn from its generosity. That night, before sleep, I wrote one line in my journal. He is not a storm anymore. He is weather turning into climate, slow, stubborn, daily. I closed the book and let the dark do what it does best. Make room. The Education Forum posted the panel online and, without asking my permission, the internet decided I was a symbol again. Parents wrote to say thank you. A few wrote to say I was dangerous. A local paper called me the woman who taught the headmaster to apologize. I wanted to correct them. I hadn't taught him to apologize. I had refused to stop telling the truth until the truth learned how to speak in his voice. One morning, a teacher from Vale, Anna, young, with the wary energy of a sparrow that has seen windows, asked if she could shadow the Friday circle. I said yes and added a chair. She watched the teenagers share lines about envy and relief, about brothers who borrow shirts and mothers who borrow sleep. Afterward, she helped put away the cups and said, "We don't know how to grade this." "You don't," I agreed. "You sustain it or you don't, but you can notice who breathes easier when they leave." She nodded, eyes shiny with the kind of belief that has just learned its first word. He told us, Adrian told us, that we are allowed to create time for this. He said, "If we don't make room for their insides, they will learn to live without them." She smiled, startled by her own courage. "He credits you often." "Credit isn't the point," I said, though the acknowledgement felt like a hand warming mine through a door. "The children are." She left with a list of exercises and a promise to try. I stood in the doorway and watched her cross the street, a small force moving through the day. I wanted to send a message to Adrian, just one line: "Keep going." I did not. Instead, I called my mother. She was feeling steady enough to ask for a walk. We went slowly, arms linked, through a park where orange trees kept their secrets. She listened to my not-quite story about a not-quite man with the patience of someone who has felt too many certainties crumble. "He is doing the work," she said at last. "That is the only thing that matters after an apology. I don't know if I can forgive him," I admitted. "Not yet. You're asking the wrong question." She squeezed my arm. "Can you forgive yourself for needing time? If you can, the rest will come when it is ready." On the way back, we passed a newsstand with the forum photo on the front page. Adrian and me, hands a breath apart, both mid-laugh, something the camera had stolen while we were not guarding our faces. My mother smirked. "You look like two people arguing about who gets to carry the lighter bag." "I always wanted to carry the heavier one," I said. "Then you'll like being loved properly one day," she answered. And the sentence felt like a prophecy wrapped in tea leaves. That evening, Luca texted, "Small salon at the theater. Come listen, no speeches, just music." I almost declined. I did not trust what music does to my spine, but Maya shoved me toward the door with a scarf and a threat in case I didn't return with at least one new emotion. The theater smelled of velvet and choices. Luca played something new. A piece in 3 movements that held itself back from resolution. He called it Rooms with Windows. The second movement was all restraint and rain. I thought of umbrellas that stay closed. Halfway through, I sensed someone step into the aisle and stand, as if the music had asked him to. I didn't turn. I didn't have to. It's a strange intimacy, knowing someone's shape by the way the air rearranges around them. When the music ended, Luca let the final note linger so long I could see silence curve. The audience exhaled together like a choir. Lights rose just enough to draw outlines from shadow. Adrian remained where he was until the clapping faded, then sat. After backstage, I found a paper program with a note in Luca's careful hand. "He didn't know you were coming." "You didn't know he was. Good. Let the city do the arranging." I laughed, an unguarded sound, and felt some internal knot loosen a degree. When we emerged into the night, Adrian waited by the alley where actors smoke between truths. He didn't touch me. He didn't move. He looked like a man practicing stillness. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank your brother," I replied. He lured me with the promise of no speeches. "No speeches," he agreed. "Just an observation." He glanced at the street where taxis stitched light. "I don't think I've ever wanted anything in the correct order." "That sounds accurate," I said, and we both smiled because honesty is a relief even when it stings. We walked without destination. The city did the kind trick of making empty sidewalks feel like invitations. He told me about a student who had stopped stabbing notebooks and started writing letters to his future self. I told him about Hugo's boat. We traded stories like children trading stones. At a corner where the cobblestones remember every pair of careful shoes, he stopped. "I have to say this," he began, voice low but steady. "I do not expect anything from you. Not now. Not ever, if that's the cost of being decent. But if the day arrives when you want to test whether what I'm building is real, the door is open. Not to Vale. To me, who I am becoming." He swallowed, a human motion I might not have noticed months ago. "I will not ask again." I looked at him, really looked. He wasn't performing remorse. He wasn't bargaining. He was simply naming a door and stepping away from it. The city, generous as always, sent a breeze at that moment. It lifted the edge of my coat and his hair, and made us both laugh at how staged it would seem in a book. "Good night, Adrian," I said. "Keep your door open, but don't wait in it." "I won't," he said, and I believed him. He hailed a taxi and did the unthinkable. He didn't look back as he left. He trusted the world to carry the rest. I stood alone for a minute, listening to the city make ordinary sounds, and realized I didn't feel abandoned. I felt accompanied somehow by the version of him that knew how to leave without closing anything. When I got home, the studio was a dark shape against the softer dark of the block. I unlocked the door and turned on only the lamp near the square. The heater made its familiar purr. The metronome watched with patient judgment. On the desk lay a stack of new drawings from the Saturday group. Windows, mostly. Windows with curtains, windows with plants, windows with stormlight and fingerprints. On one, a child had written, "A window is a door that learned manners." I pinned it to the wall beside Aisha's square, and finally, felt something like rest settle into my chest. Not closure, I don't think I believe in that word anymore, but a quiet readiness. If forgiveness was coming for me, it would find the window open. Before sleep, I wrote to the girl I had been a year ago, on the day I carried my dignity out of Vale like a fragile instrument. "You did not lose the room. You moved it. You did not lose your voice. You tuned it. The man who fired you is a student now. You do not have to teach him, but you can allow yourself to notice that he is learning. That is not betrayal. That is accuracy." I closed the journal and placed the metronome on top, a small weight to keep the past from blowing away. Outside, the city breathed. Across the river, a light came on in a building I could name without thinking. I did not wonder if it was his. I didn't need to. Some knowledge is kinder when it stays general. In the morning, I chalked a sentence on the board by the door for the first class to find. "Practice is the shape love takes when it refuses to perform." The room tasted of oranges and possibility. Maya arrived late with hair like a storm cloud and a bag of pastel de nata. The teenagers filtered in with their zips and zingers and 9,000 private weathers. I took attendance by asking, "What kind of sky are you today?" and wrote their answers next to their names. Patchy. Opening stubborn sun, shy thunder, fine, and my favorite, the kind of gray that makes yellow brighter. We wrote for an hour about doors we would not close and windows we would guard with our lives. I wrote with them. When we read out loud, nobody cried, and yet the room was full of something wetter than laughter. At the end, I assigned homework. Find where the apology ends and the work begins. Stand there, describe the floor. As they left, Hugo lingered to refill the heater's water tray, a task he had appointed himself guardian of. "Miss Elena," he said, suddenly solemn, "do fish forgive the bowl?" "I think," I said, "they just swim when the lid is gone." He nodded, satisfied with the physics of it, and ran to join the others. I watched them scatter into the morning, each carrying an invisible boat, and felt the day settle into its right speed. We are not reconciled, Adrian and I. We are not even in orbit. We are two careful travelers who discovered, by accident or providence, that the map they were given as children left out half the roads. Now we are learning to walk without falling off the edges. Forgiveness will be a chapter with more verbs than adjectives. For now, I keep the window open, the metronome honest, the tea hot, the lesson specific, the door unlocked until dusk. Somewhere across the city, A man learns how to listen to silence, and I learn how to let silence speak. The tension between us is not a wound anymore. It's a string on an instrument I am not ready to play, humming faintly in a room that knows I will one day reach for it, not to perform, but to practice. And that, I think, as the first tram rings hello to the street, is enough for this chapter. The call arrived on a Monday that smelled like rinsed stone and bakery sugar, a Lisbon morning earnest enough to make you think the world had forgiven itself overnight. I was sorting the studio's mess into piles that only I could understand. Charcoal that needed mercy, brushes that needed water, worksheets that needed breathing room. When my phone rattled against a chipped saucer and announced a number I thought I'd left in another life. Vale International. I let it ring until the sound became a line I had to cross. "Hello?" I said, already standing up straighter as if corridors could hear me through a wire. It wasn't his voice. It was Anna's, new teacher energy, brave and unsure at once. "Elena, I'm sorry. Something happened. A student shut himself in the new art room. Matteo. He won't open the door for anyone. He's not violent, but he's not talking. Adrian asked me to call you." I stared at the square of winter light sliding across my floor, at the way dust makes honesty out of the air. "He asked you to call me?" "Yes," she said, breath thin. "He said you're the one who could understand. He told me to ask nicely." The smallest laugh left me brittle and kind. "How long?" "Since 7. He keeps saying, 'She left.' We don't know who he means. The human body can inventory old pains in an instant. The meeting room with glass that pretended to be sky, the exact tilt of Adrian's jaw when he said the word standards, the silent oath I made to never let someone grate a child's soul again. And yet, "I'll come," I said. "Tell Adrian not to fix anything. Tell him to make the hallway quiet and to stop performing calm like it's a talent show." "I will," she whispered, relieved enough to shake. "Thank you." When I hung up, the studio was still itself. Lemon oil and paper, the faithful small hum of the heater we keep apologizing to for overwork. Maya heard the shape of my silence from the back and appeared with a paint-freckled mug. Was that the past or the future? "Both," I said. "I'm going to Vale." She didn't flinch. She never flinches for me. She saves that for the world. "Then take the boat." She fished in the drawer and handed me a folded paper boat with a lightning bolt down the middle. "Hugo left it last week, for emergencies that prefer metaphors." I tucked it into my bag and kissed her eyebrow. "Guard the rug," I said. "Guard your heart," she replied. "But lend it, if a child asks." The taxi took me through streets that had memorized my footsteps long before I did, past clotheslines advocating for sun, past the river pretending it didn't have tides. At Vale's gate, the guard blinked twice like a man watching time double back on itself. "Miss Duarte," he said, softer than the weather. "Welcome." The word missed its second half, back, and I respected his restraint. Inside, the school smelled the way expensive buildings smell when they are worried about their reputation, clean and tired. Anna met me halfway down the corridor, cheeks flushed with duty. "He's in there," she said, chin pointing toward the art room door. "Adrian's nearby. I told him to look busy somewhere else." "Good," I said, and meant it. Blue paint bloomed across the glass like a bruise spelling enough. I crouched so my voice could find the floor. "Matteo, it's Elena. I won't open the door. I'll just sit." Something scraped inside, chair leg, shoe, and then stillness, the good kind, the kind that listens. "I brought you a boat," I said, sliding the small lightning craft beneath the door. A breath, a rustle. The boat disappeared, permission granted by a hand I could not yet see. Behind me, air changed. I didn't have to turn to know Adrian was there. The particular density of someone trying not to be gravity. I did not give him the gift of my eyes. "Empty the hallway," I told the space. "And if anyone says calm down within hearing distance of this room, fire them." No argument. Shoes retreated. Silence climbed onto its chair. "Matteo," I said, forehead praying lightly to wood. Doors were invented so we could choose when to open them. "I'll be here either way." Time agreed to move like honey. I told him small things that do not count as questions. The river wakes early. Oranges are best cold. Every paint has a real name and a secret name. The latch clicked like a breath letting go. A slice of room revealed itself. He stood there with paint on his arms like evidence, and eyes that made me remember what oceans think of storms. "Everyone keeps saying talk," he said. "Talking makes it worse." "Then paint," I answered. "Or sit." He let me in. He did not let the world. We negotiated our 3 chairs like boarders. He painted the door he would not open yet. I watched his hands the way you watch weather, not to control it, only to know whether to bring the good umbrella. I felt Adrian more than saw him, a careful orbit. He stayed outside. Once, his shadow on the threshold shifted and I heard him place something on the floor. Water, biscuits, restraint. I almost smiled. Restraint is a form of love they never teach the powerful. Ours unfurled. The boat took on water, or maybe it learned how to float. When the light on the wall confessed to being afternoon, Mateo said, "She left," into the room. The words made no fuss about their own importance. "Who?" I asked, and sat on the floor to make space for his gravity. "My mother," he said. "She promised and then didn't. I promised I wouldn't cry. I lied. I promised not to fix it," I said. "I promised to stay." He kept painting until staying looked like art, a white seam of light under a door that could open either way. When he finally slept on the couch, hands still stained with cloud, I stepped out into a corridor that had learned a new echo. Adrian was there with 2 coffees and eyes that had not remembered bed. He handed me a cup. Our fingers learned the temperature of each other without ceremony. "He trusts you," he said. "He trusts the room," I corrected, "which means we did our job." He nodded as if the word we were a language he had been studying at night. We stood with our shoulders to the wall like 2 people who had agreed to be furniture. "Thank you for coming," he said at last. "I didn't come for you," I told the ceiling. "I know," he said. "I'm learning to like being the person you didn't come for." He almost smiled. It looked good on him, like a suit he hadn't known he owned. Morning arrived wearing the same gray as the evening, but it didn't feel like repetition. I brought oranges and patience. Anna brought soup and competence. The janitor brought a stool that didn't wobble, and the kind of kindness custodians keep in their pocket until leadership stops performing. Mateo woke, ate half, threw the spoon at memory, apologized to the sink. Progress has this choreography: forward, back, bow. At 10, a woman appeared at the door holding a grocery bag and a throat full of rain. She had the posture of someone who had been brave for too long. "Mateo?" she said, not stepping in, hands visible the way we show we carry no weapons. He froze. The brush made its own mistake along the edge of the painted door. "You left," he said, and the sentence landed on the floor like something we should not step on. She swallowed. "I did. I am sorry in all the ways that count and a few that won't help." I looked at him. "Do you want her here?" He considered the chair farthest from his easel. "There," he said. "Not close," she obeyed. "There are apologies that begin not with words, but with distance measured accurately." She sat, and time learned how to be long enough for both of them. He painted a handle for the door. He erased it with his palm. He painted a keyhole. He filled it with white. He said, "I could visit," as if the idea were a foreign coin he needed to test with his teeth. She said, "The plant on the balcony misses you, like an invitation that doesn't trap." He laughed through his nose, which is a species of forgiveness. By noon, the room had shifted a degree into human. He let her carry the grocery bag because the plastic cut her fingers. She did not try to carry him. They left without fireworks. Sometimes love's loudest trick is not leaving. Adrian appeared when the hallway had finished, pretending it wasn't watching us. "You called her?" I asked. He said. She answered. "You stayed outside." "I did," he said, and it sounded like inventory, not heroism. We walked the corridor because the corridor had learned how to walk us. The mural found us the way altars find pilgrims. My square had faded from white to the color of patience. Around it, the children had written new words that didn't need my permission. Stay, try, almost, breathe, again. "Do you regret firing me?" I asked, less a question than a measurement of air. "Every day," he said. "No audit, no defense. Not because of what it did to me, but because of what it taught the children to expect from adults. I touched to paint it again with the back of my fingers. Maybe they learned something else, too. That adults can learn again. He made the softest sound. I hope so. We didn't look at each other. Some agreements are sturdier when they're married to a wall. That afternoon, he asked if I would help design a weekly circle for kids like Mateo. Not here, I said, and he flinched like I'd slapped a shadow. With you, I finished. With Vale. With anyone who promises to keep it warm. He breathed. I can promise. You can practice, I corrected, and did not hide my smile. The janitor cut the lights in the hallway one by one the way evening cuts sugar from tea. I left with orange on my fingers and relief somewhere I couldn't name. At the gate, the guard said, "Night, miss," like he was glad the world had unrolled us back into it. I walked home through a city that had won small wars against its own weather. In my studio, the rug kept its promise to be softer than regret. I wrote one line in my notebook: "A door is a lesson in consent." Then I slept with the kind of tired that keeps no score. What came after felt less like aftermath and more like work, which is another name for love when it forgets to ask for applause. Anna and I built the in-between on the back of napkins and on the front of small bravery. We chose a circle because lines make it too easy to hide. We chose a green rug because the floor should be a meadow. We kept rules simple. Say, "I not you," hold the stone if your hands want help. Silence counts as speech. We wrote practice on the whiteboard because children know the difference between a performance and a life. Adrian did not attend. He carried chairs without ceremony and left. He stood beyond the glass like weather that had learned manners. He asked questions later that were not traps. What did the room sound like? Who laughed for the first time? What do you need that isn't a spreadsheet? Pay the people who wash the cups, I answered. And buy the good tissues. He nodded like a man drafting a constitution. Mateo came. He sat near the door the first week, near the window the second, in the middle the third. He brought his turtle by video and announced that the turtle was terrible at stares, but excellent at forgiveness. A girl read a poem about fury that we all applauded with our inside voices. Two friends learned how to apologize without using the word but. I let my shoulders forget their old job. Parents paced the edges of this new thing like guards testing a fence. Adrian proposed a circle for them too. They'll hate it, I said. And then they'll need it. They hated it. A father in an expensive wristwatch wanted outcomes. A mother wanted a cure. Someone asked if we were making the children soft. I said soft is how you hold a newborn. Soft is not the opposite of strong. By the end, two cried, one apologized. All signed the list to come again. The stone fit grown hands, too. Afterward, in the auditorium that smelled of velvet and effort, Adrian waited 3 rows back until I finished gathering cups and pride. We walked out together not in choreographed step, but with a rhythm that didn't embarrass either of us. "Luca's playing Saturday," he said, and he swore there will be no speeches. "We are very bad at invisible," I said. "Then let's be quiet instead," he offered, which is a different skill. On Saturday, the theater held breath and dust the way old buildings know to. Luca played rooms with windows, and I learned what a piano can do to a person who thought she was done being moved. Halfway through the second movement, I felt someone step into the aisle and stand because the music had asked him to. I did not turn. I didn't have to. The city has taught me the shape of his silence. After, Luca pressed a crumpled program into my hand. "He didn't know you'd be here." "You didn't know he would." "Good." I laughed without alerting the outside of my face. In the alley, smoke made lace for the air. Adrian found me and held out water the way you offer peace to a skittish animal. We talked about parents and mirrors and naps. He said, "I need to say something I should have said the day I fired you." And I let the sentence be born into cold. "I was protecting my fear, not the school," he said. "It cost you work you loved. I am sorry." The word arrived not as theater but as practice. I didn't gift him absolution. I gave him accuracy. Thank you for saying it to the part of the night that remembers. The circle program learned to stand without me every other week. Anna ran it like a person who trusts time. The green rug made us all better creatures. The talking stone became warm with use. Adrian kept to the hallways like a man learning the edges of his own influence. When he failed, he did it where children could see him repair. He interrupted once, apologized twice, and waited 3 times before speaking again. You could chart humility if you were cruel. We weren't. One evening, I found a note folded under the studio metronome. The lesson they never taught us was how to stay, inside a promise, not a room. I am trying. A. I slid it into the metronome's base so the apology could live near time. Then I wound the arm once and let the tick remind me that practice sounds like patience. A week later, Vale hosted a small open house. No speeches, just children showing adults how a circle works. Mateo guided his mother and father to chairs and made them hold the stone. They listened to their own son as if he were weather they hadn't known how to forecast. When it ended, he told me, "The door is still here," and tapped his chest. "But now it has a handle." We cleaned up cups and new hope. I walked the corridor alone and paused at the mural without permission. The square had become a galaxy. He stepped beside me after a while. We looked, both of us learning how altars work in secular light. "I used to imagine forgiveness as a single day," he said. "Now it's a calendar." "Yes," I said. Metronome until music, we didn't touch. We didn't need to. The room knew. Crisis returned the way seasons do. Not as a failure of the previous weather, but as proof that time includes more than one mood. It wasn't Mateo. It was a quiet girl named Sophia who had discovered how to disappear in plain sight. A teacher found the drawing in her notebook, a house with no windows and a stick figure holding a sign that said, "Someone." No other word. "Just that hungry one." We set the circle without announcing her name. We put the stone in the middle. Anna asked, "What's the smallest thing that made today kinder?" The answers were ordinary magic. A bus driver who waited, a grandmother who remembered toast the right color, a friend who said "me too" without stealing the story. Sophia looked at the carpet as if it could teach her how to be grass. She didn't speak. That counted. After, she stayed to help fold chairs. It was a choreography of almost words. "Your drawing," I said, matching her silence's pace, "is brave." She stilled. "It's nothing." Nothing rarely asks to be drawn. I kept my hands busy with chair legs. "Would you like to make a window?" "Paper first. We'll try real air later." She nodded without letting her eyes get loud. We sat at the side table where the markers go to rest. She drew a square and then asked, "Do windows need permission to open?" "From the weather," I said, "and from the person who lives with them." "I don't think the person knows how," she whispered. "Then we practice with paper." She cut out a small rectangle and taped it over the square with one side. "Free hinge." She lifted it and put it down. Lifted, put down. The tiniest light crossed her face like a bird considering a branch. She didn't thank me. She didn't have to. The hinge had learned her name. Adrian watched from the door, a student who had learned the art of being unimportant. After the children left, he approached the table like a person paying respect. "Paper windows," he said. "Cheap, renewable, revolutionary," I answered. "I ordered actual ones," he said. "For the ground floor classrooms. They don't open. They will." I smiled, because oxygen is the one budget item that never should have needed a meeting. That night, Lisbon rinsed itself again. I walked the long way home because I wanted to see the river admit to the moon. Near the theater, the poster for Luca's next concert had been kissed by rain into something kinder. I stood under an awning and let the world rearrange. I owe the truth this much. I thought of Adrian. Not of his suit or his power or the day he signed away my room, but of the quiet he had been practicing like scales, of the way he had held the door for a boy without owning it. A taxi glided to the curb and exhaled a familiar silhouette. He saw me and didn't flinch at the coincidence. "City's small on nights like this," he said. "Big enough to hide in if you need to," I said. "I'm tired of hiding," he answered, so simply that fatigue turned into honesty. "Walk?" We did. Umbrellas down because learning sometimes requires weather. We talked about nothing until nothing felt like something. Bread, traffic, how pigeons decide jurisdiction. On a corner where the cobblestones remember every careful step, he stopped. "I keep not saying things," he confessed. "It's a new muscle. But tonight I will say one. If you ever want to test whether what I'm building is real, the door is open. To the work, to me. I won't ask again." He didn't inch closer. He didn't present the sentence like a key. He named the door and stepped away from it. I let my breath decide. It chose patience. "Keep it open," I said. "But don't wait in the doorway. People trip." He laughed, and the sound landed in my chest with a home address. We reached my building. He started to offer the old ritual, "Can I?" Then closed the question like a gentleman closing his umbrella at the end of a storm. "Good night, Elena." "Good night, Adrian." I watched him choose a direction without checking whether I approved. It was, God help me, attractive. Endings that matter seldom arrive with trumpets. They come dressed as ordinary days that carry a slightly different light. The in-between ran with its own heartbeat. Mateo discovered the correct angle for laughing during sorrow. Sophia taught the group how to lift a paper window without tearing it. The green rug, brave and silly, collected crumbs from cookies that made truths easier to hold. Anna found a way to ask, "What did you learn about yourself by accident?" That made teenagers tell the truth by design. Adrian kept doing the unglamorous part. He wrote emails that protected time instead of slicing it. He refused a donor's proposal that would have turned the circle into a brochure, and then offered the donor a chair in the room instead. He forgot a meeting because a child's story deserved 10 more minutes. He apologized publicly and the building did not collapse. One late afternoon, the parents' circle ended with a surprising quiet. No one rushed to their cars. People lingered by the mural and the coffee urn, as if the room had become a coat they weren't ready to take off. A father who had been armored since September cleared his throat and said to no one in particular, "I haven't yelled in a week." A mother nodded like a country ratifying a treaty. Someone laughed the way doors sound when they decide not to slam. After they left, I went back to the art room with a roll of painter's tape and a reckless idea. The wall opposite the mural had been bare for too long. I pulled a long strip of tape into a square large enough to stand in. Inside it, I chalked "Room for Tomorrow." I didn't mean it as a slogan. I meant it as a refusal to let the world decide what fit. I heard his footsteps, and didn't pretend I didn't recognize them. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Room for tomorrow," he read, as if tasting the phrase for fit. "For mistakes, too," I said, "and for when we do better." He stood beside me, not touching, two shadows inside a taped square that would not survive the next coat of paint and didn't need to. "Elena," he said, and my name arrived without edge. "You told me once to guard the rooms. I will. I swear it in a language you taught me." I looked at his hands. The ink line across his thumb from a pen that had misbehaved. The small paint smear on his cuff from lifting chairs he could have delegated. I looked at the square we stood inside. I looked at the doorway in my own chest that had learned to open from both sides. Then I did the bravest small thing I have ever done. I reached, not for romance as spectacle, not for a future confessed too soon. I reached for his hand and set my palm against his, fingers slow, a choice notarized by breath. It was not a performance. It was a signature. He let out a sound not meant for meetings, and I felt the years rearrange themselves into something survivable. He did not pull me closer. He did not narrate. He stayed, that verb we had both failed at in younger tongues. "Come to the studio tomorrow," I said, hand still holding truth, not as the headmaster, as a man who can make tea without boiling it to death. "We have a Saturday circle that's learning how to fold paper boats without tearing the seam." He closed his eyes fast, opened them just as quickly, as if trust were a breeze he wasn't sure he deserved. "I'll be there, quietly. You can laugh," I said. Quietly is optional. We stood until standing felt like the right answer. When I let go, the gesture did not feel like ending. It felt like punctuation that promises another sentence. He touched the taped corner of the square the way you touch a relic. "Tomorrow," he said, and the word wore work boots, not wings. I walked out through a corridor that had learned our new plural. The guard nodded at me the way men nod when they understand women keep saving the world without calling a press conference. Outside, the river glittered like a rumor that turned out to be true. I breathed the kind of breath that meets itself halfway. Morning came in its clean shirt. I chalked a sentence on the board in the studio before the children arrived. "Practice is the shape love takes when it refuses to perform." Maya read it, squinted, and said, "Too smart," then added a drawn heart with elbows, which for reasons unknown made it perfect. The door opened. The room filled itself with ordinary miracles, shoelaces, pencils, adjectives. At 9:15, the bell over the door rang again. He stepped inside, wearing the kind of quiet you have to earn. "Tea?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "the kind that forgives water for boiling." We moved around each other with the unshowy grace of people assembling a tent before the weather knows what it wants. He overfilled the kettle and apologized to it. I laughed, and the room took that laugh and hung it near the windows. Children spilled in, excellent at pretending they were not fascinated that a man in a good shirt could hold a tray of cups without moral commentary. During the circle, I gave him the easiest job: pass the stone, listen like sunlight. He did it so earnestly that even Maya looked impressed against her will. When Hugo asked, "Do fish forgive the bowl?" Adrian said, "I think the bowl learns to be a lake." And the way the room breathed told me the answer would be enough for a week. After, the children thundered away to Saturdays. The studio learned its softer loud. I wiped a ring of tea from the table. He folded chairs as if dignity lived in corners. We did not pretend we were not thinking about our hands the whole time. At the door, I pointed to the taped square on the studio wall. Yes, I had made one here, too, and he smiled like a man recognizing a family resemblance. "Room for tomorrow," he said again. "For us," I said, because words sometimes need to be fed the truth in spoonfuls. He reached then, not to claim, not to own, but to answer, and touched my cheek with the back of his fingers. A gesture patient enough to be believed. I stepped into it because courage has a time limit. He kissed me the way you close a window before rain. Careful of the frame, grateful for the air it kept. There was no audience to applaud. The rug kept our secret. The kettle sighed like a stagehand accepting credit. We did not promise forever. We promised tomorrow at 9, and then Tuesday at 4, and then whenever a child needs a room with windows. We promised to keep the door open without standing in it. We promised to fail where someone could learn from the repair. We promised to hold the stone together, even when it was only a stone. That night, Lisbon glittered like it had decided to keep us. I walked to the river, because I wanted to say thank you to something larger than my small, excellent life. The water moved with the indifference of the ancient, which I find comforting. It means our love is not required to turn the tide. It only has to teach us how to swim without drowning each other. Back home, I placed the metronome on the windowsill and wound it once. Tick, practice, tick, tomorrow, tick, room. I taped a new note inside its base, in my own handwriting this time. The lesson they never taught us was how to leave the door unlocked and still sleep. We are learning, we are staying, we are returning gently, on purpose. Across the city, in an apartment that had once been an office for fear, a light turned on and did not rush to turn off. I did not need to know if it was his. I knew anyway. Some knowledge arrives finally not as proof, but as peace. In the morning, I will open the studio early. I will sweep the stubborn glitter from yesterday's project. I will write welcome with chalk that refuses to behave. At 9 o'clock, a bell will ring, and a man who used to mistake control for care will walk in carrying oranges and 2 paper packets of tea. He will boil the water just enough. He will set the cups down like a prayer you can drink. I will hand him the stone and watch him remember how to listen. And if you ask me how it ends, I'll say it doesn't. Not in the brittle way stories usually do. It continues in rooms that choose windows, in doorways that open both ways, in hands that reach without demanding, in the daily metronome of work that becomes music because 2 people decided to practice. This is the lesson they never taught us. This is how we pass.